Welcome to our next discipleship class in the Bible Made Clear. So this is part 2, updated of the part 1 and 2 actually of the proofs that show that Christianity is true. And last week we ended really with a couple of Frank Turek videos. So this was the screen prior to the one that we will be jumping into. And we had come to the place where only the theistic God can exist. It's the only reasonable option based on the truth being knowable, and the opposite of what is true is obviously false. So at the bottom here, only a theistic God can logically and reasonably exist. That is based on the evidence that we have walked through so far regarding knowable truth. We can only work with what we know, and what we know brings us to certain conclusions. Now, like it says here, a theistic God is the original uncaused cause of the universe, space, time, and matter, and is separate from it. So as we move along here, this next screen was the one that we would have picked up on, and so logic is actually used to draw the conclusions that we're coming to. How is that? Well, logic is presupposed, right? So man is created with a reason, the ability to do that. And man could not communicate or discover without it. In other words, without us utilizing our reasoning abilities and logic, we can't really do anything. We can't communicate. You wouldn't understand what I'm saying. What I would be saying would be meaningless. What you would say would be meaningless if we were not reasoning through the logic of what is presented or claimed or cases made. The ability to think is to exercise reason. We're using our minds. Now, when we get further on and start talking about God more, God is obviously working through our minds. So he obviously gave us this ability to reason. Otherwise, we would not be able to think or even reason in regards to our faith in him. So using logic is the result of reasoning to a conclusion. We have to draw conclusions based on what we know. In other words, if I perform an action that causes great pain, which is really the law of causality, then it is only logical to conclude, based on my reasoning, I'm going to think through this, that if I continue to perform the same action, it will continue to produce great pain. This is my analysis based on the evidence that I possess. And this is very simple and straightforward. We do this all the time. If I hit my head against the wall and it hurts, and every time I do that it hurts, then I am going to conclude based on that evidence that it's going to give me pain each time I do it, so why would I do it? Man uses logic in order to analyze anything. So logic is from God because he created the universe. It is ordered, and our ability to think and reason through the order of the universe is given to us. We did not develop it through some evolutionary process. It was given to us by God because we're made in his image. If the universe was not ordered, we could not do science. You could not send the Mars rover and actually hit Mars. It wouldn't work because none of the calculations, the analysis, everything would be changing. It would be a moving target. There would be no fixed anything. But everything is ordered. Everything continues to function according to the same laws. Those laws have to be established. They don't just kind of come from somewhere. Somebody has to make those laws if they did not exist in the first place. Man can comprehend what he discovers because of this order. I mean, all this presupposes that I have the ability to do this, and that it was put there. It didn't arbitrarily get there by accident because of the the beneficial mutations over millions of years in evolution, that's such an absurdity. I can't even get on that road at this point. The universe makes sense to man's ability to logically analyze it. So logic is an important piece here. We have to think through. I've had, and this is for Christians, I've had Christians say to me, well, are you putting logic above the scriptures? No, not at all. I'm using my logic and my reasoning ability to understand the scriptures. Because here's the problem. If you just say, well, just quote the Bible, well, that's fine, but how do I know what the Bible says unless I utilize my reasoning ability? In other words, it's always presupposed. There's no way to get around it. You have to use it to do anything. Now, the question arises, is God subject to the laws of logic? In other words, are they beyond him or not? If God exists, is he subject to these laws, right? Or does God transcend logic? Is he beyond logic? Well, for example, if we replace the word God with Tao, that's pronounced with a D, force, or whatever you want to use that, it clarifies the issue. For example, Zen Buddhists claim that the Tao transcends logic, so we'll understand this by comparison. In other words, the Tao goes beyond true and false, right and wrong, etc. And here's a quote from their website. Tao means literally the path or the way. It is a universal principle that underlies everything from the creation of galaxies to the interaction of human beings. The workings of Tao are vast and often beyond human comprehension. In order to understand it, reasoning alone will not suffice. One must also apply intuition. So they're saying basically the Tao is beyond, right? So Taoists use the law of non-contradiction and logic to deny the law applies to the Tao. This doesn't make sense, okay? It's the same when we apply the concept of logic and reason to theism. So you can't have something beyond what is there and not have it interact with it or anything. In other words, if the Tao is beyond logic and reason, then how can you can't comprehend the Tao. You can't even deal with the Tao. How would you know that? In other words, how would you come to the conclusion that the Tao is beyond logic and reason? You'd have to know enough about the Tao to say, well, no, the Tao is beyond that. It's not possible. It's a self-defeating position. But we need to apply that same concept to theism. So the God revealed in the Bible does not transcend logic because there is nothing beyond him. There's nothing beyond God. So logic can't transcend him. The biblical God doesn't transcend logic. He embodies it. This is where it comes from. This is everything has to be grounded somewhere. Well, logic is grounded in God. It's part of his nature, right? His nature is the basis for logic. He didn't create it. He's the exemplification of it. God is a non-contradictory being revealed to us. So we know that God cannot contradict himself. So, since he is a non-contradictory being, though he's beyond our ability to completely comprehend him, right? In other words, I can't really truly understand everything about God. It doesn't make him beyond logic, right? And the law of non-contradiction, so we can apprehend him. In other words, if God reveals something to me about himself, then I can certainly apprehend that. I can bring that within my grasp and deal with that, though I may not comprehend God in his infinite nature because it's beyond my ability to comprehend that type of, excuse me, think about the power it would take to create the universe. I have nothing to compare that to. So I can apprehend it. I can understand it, that it exists. I can understand it conceptually. I can believe it. It can make reasonable sense to me. It's rational that obviously whoever created the universe has to be more powerful and beyond it. In other words, all those things, based on what I know, I can understand. However, I cannot truly comprehend the power that God actually has to be able to do that. There's no reference that I have. So he's the reference. He is the only place that would be grounded, right? Logic, morality, truth, nature, which is goal-directed, the law of causality, right? Its consistency, and reason are all grounded in God's unchanging nature. They do not change because he does not change. His nature doesn't change, so these don't. Very simple logic.
Thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Joseph.
Joseph. Go ahead, sir.
Is this mic on? Oh,
Yeah, it's on.
So, very similar question, but from a different perspective. So, what's his name? It's the guy you mentioned, Christopher Hitchens.
Yes, Christopher Hitchens, yes.
In one of the debates that you had with him, he stood up and he said, God exists. And this, in this sense, that...
Joseph's just tall, so... You can just take the mic off. Take it out of there, Joseph. It's all right. Just take it out of there. Here you go.
So that God does exist in a sense, that he exists in the minds of people, but he has no existential stuff. He's not made of matter. He exists in the same way that logic and reason and concepts exist. What do you mean when you say that God actually exists anywhere else but in the patterns of reality?
Well, I would say that there are many things that are not material that we know exist. You just mentioned one of them, the laws of logic, right? These are immaterial things. They exist. Love exists.
Logic exists as a pattern that we observe things behaving in accordance with.
Right, but...
It's like the wind.
The laws, right, but the laws of logic exist independent of human minds. Let me put it this way. If
the laws of logic aren't in existence without some material function enacting their behavior.
Well, no, let me give you a thought experiment. Let's suppose there are no human minds on Earth, right?
Yeah,
there's just a rock on Earth. Is it true?
There was a time, I believe, there were just rocks.
What's that?
There was a time when there was an Earth without humans. And
there were no human
yeah.
minds. So if I say there are no human minds on the Earth, would that statement be true?
Yes.
Okay, so the laws of logic exist independent of human minds. In fact, we couldn't even...
A description of the laws of logic don't exist without human minds, but the rock is still there.
Right, but
the rock follows the laws of logic, and it's matter behaving in a logical way.
Right, but these laws are independent of human minds because we couldn't even communicate unless we were accessing the same laws of logic. If you had your private idea of the laws of logic and I had my private idea of the laws of logic, there's no way we could even communicate. We are trafficking in immaterial reality right now to even talk to one another, and that immaterial reality, in my view, is grounded in the nature of God. So it is grounded in a mind, but it's grounded in the great mind, not just our minds. Our minds use that as a bridge to other minds, but we didn't create that bridge. That bridge is what we mean by God's nature.
Okay. You're not making a distinction between what's material and what's immaterial. And if you're saying God is something immaterial, then it exists only as a pattern in the material world.
No, what I'm saying is if there were
In
no
our
material,
minds.
God would still exist.
And Lawrence Krauss, it's a very funny way of pushing off the argument, but nothing, in effect, did create God in the same way that it created the description of logic. The universe came into being.
God wasn't created. That's the point. It's like Aristotle. So
you're saying that, but then you can't demonstrate that God didn't get created.
Well, no, you can because
it's an immaterial thing. You've already described it as a distinction between the material and the immaterial.
It didn't get created at all. That's right.
This
being that we call God always existed. There was
in the same way that the laws of maths and logic
I think the
always
laws
existed.
of math, I think the laws of logic are derivatives of God's nature. That yes, he's the orderer of all things, God.
Okay.
So logic, math, why we have a sensible world that's orderly, I think are expressions or effects of the orderer. In fact, tomorrow night we're going to talk about why God is actually needed for science. Now that may sound crazy, but I think without an orderly universe there would be no way we could even do science. And I think there must be an orderer for that.
Yeah, I'll ask another question tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Joseph.
Yeah,
Good questions.
All right, so I think that Frank did a much better job explaining that than I can, so that was the value there, even though that guy kind of, he didn't actually understand. He was trying to compare, because God is not part of time, space, and matter, and is not material in that way, then God is like just a thinking pattern or something, but he didn't really understand the distinction with God being a being. So, as we move along,
why is there suffering?
let me start that again for you, because this is a great little video.
Is God good? If he is, why is there suffering and evil? Let's assume for the moment that God is all-powerful. This means that God can do anything that is logically possible. So he can create galaxies and subatomic particles and rainforests and you. But God cannot do what is logically impossible. He cannot make a square circle or a one-ended stick. So can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? No. So what if, when God created human beings, he wanted them to be free? Freedom's a good thing. But if humans are to be free, they cannot be forced to obey God. Because freedom without choice is like a square circle. It's a logical contradiction. No choice, no freedom. God didn't want robots. He wanted real people. The first humans endowed with the awesome power of free choice abused their freedom. The tragic consequences of their bad choice and our bad choices ripple across the world. God is responsible for the fact of freedom, but humans are responsible for their acts of freedom. But let's remember, we don't suffer alone. God will put an end to suffering and evil. And God became a man to suffer with us. God is good, and he wants real people like you to know him, but the free choice is yours.
Yeah, I like that little video. It really does get the point across, especially in regard to logic, though it's aimed at a few different things. So logic and reason, evidence for non-contradiction. Now, non-contradiction is the basis of all that we're talking about here. If you don't understand non-contradiction, you will never understand what we're actually trying to deal with in truth and absolutes and this whole thinking process. So since only one view about God has the possibility of being true, the opposites are excluded, right? It's a law of non-contradiction. Again, that means, you can't have two things that are opposite and true at the same time in the same sense. What view of God and reality are true? Well, we must discover what view is consistent with knowable truth, rejecting the opposite as false. So again, I know God based on his effects, and I work that backwards, right? So I work that back to the cause. That's how we're doing this. We must discover what view doesn't violate the law of non-contradiction, or what God does not violate that, right? And that will correspond to reality, what is real. Any truth claim about God that is self-defeating or violates the laws of logic has to be rejected. So when we talk about pantheism, for example, that everything is God, and or everything created itself, or everything's always been here, but it's space, time, and matter. I mean, all these things are in contradiction. Now, because they are, people that are pantheists, for example, Hinduism, they will say, well, we're living in an illusion. But how do they know they're in an illusion? There's no way to actually know that until you're out of the illusion. And then once you're dead, it's not like you're coming back to tell people about it. The only one that came back from the dead to explain is Jesus Christ, right, in the resurrection. So, all the people within the pantheistic worldview, the ones that have died, they are still dead. So nobody's communicating anything back. Now, the only reasonable path is to follow the evidence. Everything requires evidence. You don't want to just have a blind belief. We want to follow the evidence. So we will follow general revelation, which is nature, right? Which is there. We're not even dealing with the Bible yet. General revelation is nature. It's all of creation, the universe, everything that we can see and discover. And then we go to special revelation, which is the Bible, and we just follow the evidence where it leads us, okay? So the Bible assumes the law of non-contradiction as we go through the Bible, right? So Jesus assumed the self-evident reasoning of this law. How do we know that? Well, he said in Luke 11:23, "He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters." He's using non-contradiction. He's saying, this is not that. If you are not with me, you're against me. Those are two things that are opposite, right? So they are not saying the same thing, right? There is something else different from what I am saying, right? So you can't be both with Jesus and against Jesus at the same time in the same sense. It just doesn't work. Though some people try to be. John 8:32, he says, "And you will know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Well, you can't be free and bound at the same time, right? In the same sense. So you can be free from one thing and bound to another, but you can't be free from A and bound to A. It's just, these things don't make any sense. They're not logically possible, and it's not our practice and our experience in daily living. Mark 3:24, "If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand," right? So a kingdom can't be both divided and in unity at the same time in the same sense. These things are very, very self-evident. What I'm doing is I'm showing you in the Bible how these statements assume that we think like this, which is why we're talking about this kind of thinking method, all right? Paul assumed the self-evident reasoning of the law of non-contradiction. In Galatians 2:16, he said, "Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ, we might be justified by faith in Christ and not by the works of the law." So what did he do? You can't be justified by both works and faith at the same time in the same sense. You can't. So you can't mix the two. Mormons and other cults, they mix, Jehovah's Witnesses, they mix faith and works together into this hodgepodge because they read the words, works, and faith in the Bible. They just kind of smash them all together. They conflate them. But they're saying different things. Paul actually makes a distinction between faith and works, but that's a whole nother subject. Galatians 3:2, he says, "This only I want to learn from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith?" Obviously, you can't have the same thing. You can't receive the Spirit by both the works of the law and hearing of faith at the same time in the same sense. Otherwise the question is meaningless. It doesn't make any sense. Romans 11:1, "I say then, Has God cast away his people? Talking about the Jews. Certainly not. For I am also an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God can't both cast off and not cast off Israel at the same time in the same sense. So obviously, replacement theology where the church is supposed to replace Israel, again, a whole nother subject, is nonsense, and it violates scripturally the law of non-contradiction. John assumed the self-evident reasoning of the law. 1 John 4:1, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world, right? So spirits can't be both from God and not from God at the same time in the same sense. It doesn't work. 1 John 5:12, He who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. Can't get it any simpler. You can't both have the Son and not have the Son at the same time in the same sense. You know, J. Vernon McGee used to say you're either a saint or an ain't. You're either saved or you're not saved. You're either a genuine Christian believer following Jesus Christ or you're not. It's one or the other, not both. There are only a few examples of what is these are only a few examples of what is throughout the entire Bible. The law of non-contradiction is just the name given to a self-evident law used by people every day. It's how we think. It's how we live. How about the nature of truth? It is objective. In other words, subjective is with my bias. Objective is to the object that we're dealing with without bias. Now, the truth is objective related to the object, right? There is no personal bias in the object. It's for all people at all times and all places, right? In other words, 2 plus 2 is 4 is true no matter where we are or who we are. It's always the same no matter where you go. You go out in space somewhere, 2 and 2 is 4. Doesn't make 5. Truth is not subjective. It's not subject to my bias. It's not what I would like it to be. There is personal bias in the subject. That's what subjective means, right? This would make it true for some people at some times in some places. In other words, I may want 2 plus 2 to be 5, but my subjective desire will not make it true. Now, in our culture, we talk about, this is your truth, my truth. There's only one truth. Truth is truth. It's absolute, and it corresponds with reality. I do not have my individual truth that is just mine, and then you have your truth that's just yours. That's nonsense. I can have my own opinions. I can have my own beliefs. I can have my own wishes and perspectives and wants, but I can't have my own truth that's isolated to me that somehow is true absolutely for me, but then it is ineffective for you. It has no relationship to you because I cannot change reality based on what I just want. That does not happen. The nature of truth is limited, right? Truth is narrow. People don't like this, but 2 and 2 will always be 4. Out of all the other numbers, and there's obviously as many as you can imagine, it can't be them. It can only be 4. Truth is always going to be narrow. People don't like that because they want things their own way, which gets back to I want my truth, but it doesn't. You're not dealing with reality. You're living in a myth. It's a fantasy world. But the truth is narrow, and 2 and 2 is 4 for all people at all times and all places. The truth is exclusive. It always is. The truth always excludes its opposite. It can't not, right? 2 plus 2 excludes every other answer that is not 4. It's as simple as that. All truth claims are absolute. Each claim excludes its absolute opposite, right? Every truth claim makes its opposite false. If I try to tell you that 2 and 2 is not 4. Well, I'm excluding, even though I'm wrong, I'm excluding whatever is opposite that. There's no way to get away from this. In trying, as mentioned earlier, when you try to deny the law of non-contradiction, you actually have to use it to deny it. So basically, by denying it, you're actually affirming it. How is the nature of truth applied? So every belief excludes opposite beliefs. Very simple. In other words, atheism, relativism, they all exclude their opposite. An atheist says any belief that talks about God is excluded from their view. Relativism, everything is relative. Well, those people would say, well, anybody that claims that there's something that's absolute, that's not true, right? In other words, it's opposite their view. Claiming atheism or relativism is true says the opposite of each is false. The claim that every religion is true, which is pluralism, right, excludes its opposite. In other words, it excludes religions that believe the opposite of people that believe, or in a religion that believe in pluralism, that all religions are true. All religions claim values and exclude the opposites. In other words, everything can't be true. And this is true of all religions since they all claim different truths which result in conflicting beliefs. So you can't have all religions be true. All religions can't be true because their beliefs conflict. It's just not possible. Any religion that claims inclusion of all beliefs is in contradiction to its own claim. So now, you have these universalists and all that. They say, oh no, every belief is true. We include everybody. Well, you know what? They're excluding all the people that say that every belief isn't true. In other words, they're violating their own claim by saying they're including everybody. They're actually excluding people that believe differently or hold a different position than them. People don't just seem to grasp the simple nature of this. The nature of truth in life. This is interesting. So people live by the law of non-contradiction and objective truth every day in life, even the people that deny it, okay? So in healthcare, your medical accuracy, when you go to the doctor, I guarantee you that all the people that deny the law of non-contradiction, they want their name on that medical record and not somebody else's. They don't want to receive care that's due for somebody else. And how about in banking? Your precise bank account number. How much is in there. You go to the bank and say, I'd like to take out $50, and they say you only got, $5 in there. What are you going to say? Well, that's true for you, but not for me. I want the 50. It doesn't work like that. That doesn't work like that at all. In court, do you want to stand up in court and be guilty of some crime, and then the judge says, okay, a year in jail, and you go, whoa, I don't have to go to jail. That's true for you, but not for me? No, that's nonsense. Everybody lives by this. You can't escape it. In relationships, do you want your spouse going out committing adultery, and then when you say, hey, that's not right. Well, that's true for you, but not for me. It's all relative. No, it doesn't work like that. Nobody lives like that. Everyone lives by the absolute truth, which is defined and understood through the law of non-contradiction. People avoid it when it suits them, obviously, but this shows people are not being honest with the truth themselves or thinking logically and reasonably. In other words, the thinking is broken. You have a broken arm, it doesn't work right. You have a broken leg, you can't walk. Well, if your thinking is broken, you can't think right. And that is part of the problem in our culture. People believe such nonsense on so many things that it's difficult to rein them in to even have a conversation to help them understand that their thinking is broken. Now, does the truth change? We see people that all the time will go, well, the truth changes. Well, in earlier truth, if that was correct, people used to say the earth was flat. That's what they believed, right? They had a later truth where they said The earth is round. It's not flat, right? The truth didn't change, though, however. Our understanding of the truth did. So the truth doesn't change. The truth does not change. The earth was always round, right? Those who believed it was flat were in error. Didn't matter what they believed. Misconceptions of the truth. The truth can be absolute without an absolute understanding of it. In other words, the truth is absolute, but that doesn't mean I have a proper understanding of the absolute aspect of whatever it is that I'm dealing with, right? If we reference the previous example of the earth, right? The earth was always round, whether I understood it or not. I may not have had a proper understanding of the absolute nature of the earth being round, but that didn't change it, right? The truth can be beyond my understanding with what I know. I just may not have full knowledge. Again, dealing with the example of the earth was believed to be flat until further knowledge showed the error. Very simple. Learning and updating our understanding of the truth does not change the truth, okay? Those are misconceptions. The truth is discovered, not invented. Nobody invents the truth. We have to discover it because it's already there. Basically, because the truth corresponds with reality, my mind is coming into a proper alignment with what is real. That's what's happening there. I'm discovering that. In other words, gravity was discovered. It wasn't invented. The truth is the same for all people in all places at all times. Can't get away from it. Not believing or understanding the truth won't change the truth. It doesn't make it different. It may make my claim different, but it doesn't change reality. People who don't understand or believe in gravity, they don't float away. They don't start leaving the planet. Say, Harry, believe in gravity so you come back. No, it doesn't work like that. Gravity is real and it holds everybody on the planet, regardless of their belief, regardless of whether they even know anything about gravity. Gravity was there before anybody discovered it. This truth is the same for all people in all places at all times. Example, right? Does believing the Bible is true make it true? No. It's true whether I believe it or not. It doesn't matter what I believe about it. That doesn't change the reality of it. Truth is objective. The Bible is the object, right? Does disbelieving the Bible make it false? No. It doesn't matter. People can say, well, I don't believe the Bible. That doesn't mean it's not true. My psychological state about something doesn't change the fact of it, right? My belief has no effect on the truth. Truth corresponds to reality, not opinion. Very important to understand that. Attitudes don't change the truth, right? Having a bad attitude towards the truth doesn't make it false, right? Poor examples of truth don't make them lies. You can have some people that are telling you the truth, and maybe they're not telling you in a nice way, or they're a bad example, but that doesn't make it not true. People tend to evaluate the presentation and ignore the substance of the presentation. That is a cultural problem that we are facing now, right? People evaluate whether something's true based on how well it's presented and not on the substance of the presentation itself. We have to get by just the visual aspect of whether it looks great or the music is nice, it's entertaining. That does not make it true, right? A good attitude towards a lie doesn't make it true, right? Presenting lies nicely don't make them true, right? People tend to accept how information is presented and ignore what is presented. So I'm saying the same thing up above in yellow, same way on the bottom, only differently. We have to evaluate based on the evidence of a claim in what somebody is saying, teaching, communicating, whatever, not how they do it. Maybe they're a lousy speaker. That doesn't mean that what they're saying, is false. I'm no great orator, But if I'm telling you something that is true, regardless of how entertaining it is or how appealing I am to listen to, does not make it true or not true. It's true based on its own merits, because truth is objective. It has nothing to do with me. I'm only communicating or claiming something, whether it's true or not.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Mark.
Mark.
Can I just say I'm very honored to be here.
Yes, sir.
I really is it on?
Mark, don't touch the mic, because otherwise the people at home are going, stop!
Sorry, everyone at home.
It's like fingers on the chalkboard. Yeah, sorry. Just got to bend down a little bit.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think my struggle a lot of times is you can go through the logic as you've very eloquently demonstrated, and you can. It's really undeniable when it comes down to it. But what I run into is that people, you reach a point with them, people of different worldviews, they say, okay, yes, I understand your point, yes, I understand your logic, but I don't subscribe, or I choose not to believe that. And so I guess my question is, how do you deal with that? How do you go from them just saying, okay, I acknowledge that you're true and you're right and logical in this, but I choose not to accept that?
Well, everyone has the free will to assent or not to assent to what's out there. And God gives us the free will to do so. But here's a question I ask everybody who's not a Christian. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I ask that of atheists. If there's any atheists here tonight, I hope you come up and ask a question, because I'll ask you this question. I'm just giving you a warning up front, just so you can be ready for it. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone, including last night. I asked the question, and sometimes atheists will say, no, I wouldn't become a Christian if it were true. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God because they want to be God of their own lives, and God gets in the way. See, we're not on a truth quest, many of us. We're on a happiness quest. And we're going to believe whatever we think is going to make us happy. And here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term by doing a lot of stupid, fun things. But over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here who's over 40 knows what I'm talking about it, because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? Gee, that didn't work out. So ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If they hesitate or say no, you realize the problem isn't intellectual. The problem is volitional. It's not a problem of the head, it's a problem of the heart. In fact, for you Christians in here, let me just ask one question mark of the whole audience, if I can, for a second. For those who are Christians, just for the Christians, I want to ask you guys this question. I want you to think of somebody you know who's not a Christian, whom you'd like to be a Christian. Could be a friend, relative, whoever it is, right? Everyone got somebody? Okay, here's my question about the person you're thinking of right now. Is the person you're thinking of right now on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity's true. Or are they apathetic or maybe even hostile? How many say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? How many? Crickets. How many people say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Yeah, everybody else. It is the same everywhere I go. It's 100 to 0 or 99 to 1. People don't want it to be true. So you've got to ask them that question and see where they go with it.
And then I guess your response to that would be, just to pray and pray for their heart.
Yeah, pray, love them, and maybe at some point, after you planted enough seeds, and sometimes it's because some dramatic event occurs in their life, that your phone will ring and that person will be on the other end. Why? Because when something goes wrong, they're not going to call their atheist friend who's going to say, this stuff happens. There's no rhyme or reason to it. They're going to call you. When the student's ready, the teacher will appear.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
That was good. So, moving on. We're now going to get into some self-stultifying statements. What is that? Big word, right? That is when you make a statement, but you're actually contradicting yourself, or you're shooting yourself, right? So it's a self-defeating argument. Like a gun with a poor design on that one. You aim at something else, but you end up shooting yourself. Well, those of you old enough to remember the Roadrunner. So this is going to be, this is a fun part, but this is called the Roadrunner tactic. This is named that by Frank Turek, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, that book. And what it is that you take a claim that somebody makes and you turn the claim on itself, or you see, does the claim support its own principle, or is it contradicting, right? So we can get into a couple of examples here, right? Because there's self-refuting statements. Basically, the people are left with no ground to stand on, like the Wile E. Coyote there. So the Roadrunner, right, reveals contradictions, the Roadrunner tactic, as they call it. The Roadrunner tactic is a term given to the tactic to test truth claims, right? When a person makes a claim, you apply the claim to itself. In other words, does it support its own claim or not? If a claim is self-contradictory, it will fail its own principle or standard that it's stating, right? This is your greatest tool in answering these objections, right? Apply the claim to itself. That's what we're going to do here, all right? So let's test statements against their claim, right? How? In review, we apply the truth claim to itself. We see, can it survive its own principle? Can the claim meet its own standard, right? In other words, self-refuting statements have no ground to stand on. That's the Roadrunner. All right, so here's the first example. We got our university professor, and then we'll have our students. So I can't speak a word in English. Isn't that English? So again, he's defeating his own claim. It doesn't support its own standard. He's saying in English, I can't speak a word in English, right? So that's how this is going to work. We have a number of these. So a response to postmodernism. There is no truth. Well, is that true? Now, the person, the university professor here, he's claiming there's no truth, but he's making a truth claim, right? He's making a claim of truth that there is none. So you turn the claim on itself. You're almost taking the same, in most cases, you'll be taking the same statement and then turning it back on itself. No one knows the truth, which is a postmodern claim, right? Is that true? Or how do you know that's true? If no one knows the truth, how does he know that no one knows the truth? You see, none of this will pass muster. How about a response to atheism, right? There is no God since there is injustice in the world, right? Or evil, which is something that a lot of atheists claim. How do we know the standard of justice if there is no God? The question implies a moral lawgiver. So basically, how would you know what justice is and how would you know there isn't any if there's no standard? And there can't be a standard without God, because justice implies a moral law, and in order to have a moral law, there has to be a moral lawgiver. Very simple and straightforward. How about a response to relativism? All truth is relative. Well, is that relative? Well, obviously, they're making a non-relative claim. They're saying all truth is relative. It's an absolute truth claim. Well, the question back to the university professor is that relative? Right? In other words, relativism fails its principal claim. Another relativism. There is no absolute truth. Same thing. Is that absolutely true? Right? Just a variation. The truth changes. We went over that in earlier slides, right? Because we know it doesn't. Does that truth change? So, in other words, if the truth changes, as they claim, does that truth change? Does the claim that the truth changes change? Because then that would mean that the truth is not going to change, or it will change. In other words, so I don't know if I'm saying that right. So the truth changes. Does that truth change? Does the truth that truth changes change? And if it does, that means that that won't be true anymore. That's true for you, but not for me, right? We talked about this. Is that true for you and not me, right? In other words, is it true for everyone? Well, if someone says, if I say, well, you need Jesus, and they say, well, that's true for you and not for me, well, it can't be, that's not correct. They can't make a claim that something's true for me and not for them because I believe something that's different. What they're really saying is, I have my truth, you have your truth, and they're different. But the problem is that my truth is in disagreement with their truth, so their truth is not true. It's not true because it's different, and it is our basic disagreement as to what's true that means it's not true for me differently than something is true for them. They're trying to isolate truth to their own world with just them in it, and that does not work. Relativism always fails, right? All truth depends on your perspective. Does that truth depend on your perspective? In other words, maybe I see it differently than you. Is it still true from my perspective? Nobody can claim that my view is wrong or it's incorrect because it's different. If it's my viewpoint, viewpoints are opinions, but truth does not depend upon perspective or opinion. How about a response to liberalism? You're not tolerant. We get this claim all the time, against Christians especially. Is that tolerant, right? Toleration is accommodating something you disagree with. Well, basically, if somebody says you're not tolerant, well, isn't the definition of tolerance that you're supposed to respect my different viewpoint and opinion? You can't have it just one way. Tolerance is a two-way street. You should not judge. Hear that all the time. Isn't that a judgment? They're judging me. If somebody says, well, if I make a judgment, they say you shouldn't judge. It's like, well, but that's a judgment. Everybody makes judgments, right? That's just your interpretation. Well, isn't that your interpretation? In other words, somebody says, basically, isn't that your perspective? Well, I have my perspective and you have your perspective, but you can't say your perspective is correct because it disagrees with mine. You have to base it on evidence, not on perspective. How about a response to skepticism? Nothing is true for everyone, which is the skeptic, right? Is that true for everyone? See, none of it really works. Pluralism, right? Opposites can both be true because you would say all religions are true. Isn't the opposite of that false, right? Because they're claiming one aspect is true, so everything else opposite is false. It doesn't stand up to its own claim. All religions lead to God. Is that what all religions claim? No. So they can't make that claim for all religions, right? Pluralism fails its own principal claim. Scientism, right? People worship science. Science is the only truth. Is that a scientific truth? So can you take that statement, that claim, and put it under a microscope and see it and say, yes, that science tells us that's true? No. How do you test that in a lab? It's a philosophical claim. You have to have a philosophy to do science. Before you ever get to the lab, before you ever do an experiment, you reason it out, right? There's a philosophy. There's a whole logical reasoning process why you're going to do that experiment or test it or come up with a hypothesis in the first place, right? So you have to use philosophy just to do science, and you can't put philosophy under a microscope. Scientism fails. How about skepticism, right? We should doubt any statements about reality. Again, skeptics say that. Should I doubt that statement about reality? This is where this stuff always ends up. You should doubt all truth claims. Well, should I doubt that? How about that truth claim? Doubt that one, right? Skepticism fails its own principal claim. Postmodernism, right? Basically, all talk about God is meaningless. Is that talk about God meaningless? You're talking about God, and then you're saying it's meaningless. But postmodernism basically is that there's no truth anyways. How about subjectivism? Talk about God isn't objective, right? Isn't that an objective truth claim about God? Yes, because you're making a claim about the objectivity of God and saying it isn't objective. How about pantheism, right? Everything's God. You should not trust your senses, which pantheists claim because they say that we're living in an illusion. Should I trust my senses when I read that statement, right? What does my sense tell me about that? There's something wrong with it. I came to realize by being enlightened that I am God. How could you be God since God always knew he was God? If somebody has to tell you that you're God, we got a problem. Houston, we have a problem. The response to the illogical. You're just playing word games. Is that a word game, right? In other words, if we use logic as Christians or theists, it's a word game. When somebody else uses logic, it's the truth. Response to Immanuel Kant. So Kant is somebody from the past, philosopher, right? He says you can't know the real world. Like it's not possible. Then how do you know that about the real world? If you this is almost like agnosticism, which says, you can't really know God. He doesn't want to have a relationship with you. Well, you have to know all about God to know that about him, that you can't know that. In other words, you have to know the real world to say you can't know it. You have to have enough knowledge to be able to do that. It's a self-defeating claim. How about David Hume? He says only self-evident or empirically verifiable claims are meaningful. Is that claim self-evident or empirically verifiable? No. So, it's self-defeating. He's just making a claim that self-evident or empirically verifiable claims are meaningful, but you can't verify his claim empirically or make it meaningful to everybody. It's not possible. Bart Ehrman, he's the atheist religious teacher down at North Carolina. So he says the reader determines the meaning of the text when you're reading something, and he's talking about reading the Bible. Should I determine the meaning of that? In other words, if that's true, then maybe when he writes his books and he puts his out, then maybe I should read his and I'll determine what he means. But he would say, no, that's not what I meant. Well, then I guess the reader doesn't determine the meaning of the text. How about Stephen Hawking, right? When he was alive, he said free will is an illusion. Did you come to that freely? Is that statement an illusion? In other words, how did he come to that conclusion? If free will is an illusion, and if he has no real freedom, then how does he freely make that case? And if it's just, the chemicals firing off in his brain that make him say that, then he's not really saying anything. In other words, neither of those things make sense. To try to claim there's no free will or say that we're living in an illusion will not stand up. He says philosophy is dead. He put that in one of his books. Is that philosophy? In other words, your philosophy dead. In other words, philosophy is reasoning, essentially. So he's saying, reasoning through stuff it's really dead. Well, is your reasoning through things dead? How about Daniel Dennett? He's a teacher over at Tufts. He says consciousness is an illusion. Is that an illusion, right? In other words, are you conscious of what you're claiming. In other words, he's saying consciousness is an illusion. He teaches on it, wrote a book on it, and it's like, well, wait a minute. How do you know what you're conscious of isn't an illusion like your claim? You can't. It's all self-defeating. Richard Dawkins. If God made the universe, who made God? Well, you claim the universe made you, then who made the universe? He's stuck with the same problem. Richard Dawkins. There are gaps, but science will find the answers. Wait a minute. That's faith. It's the natural law of the gaps fallacy, right? So atheists oftentimes claim that Christians claim the God of the gaps, which we don't. In other words, if we don't understand, we just stick God in there, and we don't do that. However, they do that with natural selection, right? They take natural law and also natural selection and evolution, and when they don't understand something, they just say, well, that did it. Well, natural law did it. Natural law will eventually tell us that. Natural law is apparently a miracle worker, and so isn't Darwinian evolution, because when they can't understand something, they say, well, that all came to be through natural selection. Well, natural selection's producing some pretty miraculous stuff, I'll have to say. But Dawkins conflicts with himself, right? He says, in an atheistic world, there isn't any justice, there's no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Well, he then says the God of the Old Testament is unjust in his other book. Which Richard Dawkins should we believe? It's one or the other, because he's in conflict with himself. So, we've kind of run out of time here. We're at an hour, but I just wanted to get through those for the end here. But look, self-defeating statements don't make sense since they violate the law of non-contradiction. And this is actually what we'll do is we'll go through this next time because we'll kind of summarize on these points. But hopefully this was helpful. This will be part 2. Obviously, we'll have to get to a part 3 next time. So until next time, may God richly bless you as you continue to study his word.